Welcome. My name is Emily Almas. I work here in the admissions office at Bowdoin College, and we're very excited to have you with us to talk about the sophomore finish of the sophomore year, the sophomore seminar, as you think and look ahead towards the summer and your junior year, what you and or your student might ought to be thinking about. And I'm looking forward to a good conversation over the next hour or so. I have some slides to share some tips and tricks with you, more tips, less tricks, and also to answer hopefully any questions that you might have. You will note down below in your panel of tools, there is a closed captioning option. So please feel free to select that and use closed captioning if you wish. You also can ask a question. We have a question and answer option. Put your questions there, and hopefully we'll get to some of your questions live throughout this program. If for some reason you need to jump off or we don't get to your questions, please note that you can always reach out to the admissions office at admissions@bowdoin.edu, and we're always happy to help. So we're looking forward to a good hour or so together. So as I mentioned, ideally you or your student are a sophomore, maybe you're wrapping up that sophomore year, maybe the year has already come to a close where you are and it's already a break time. But this is an exciting moment in your high school experience. And I think I want to start by just saying, remember to take a deep breath, to rest and recharge in the months ahead. One of the most frequent questions I receive from students and families at this juncture in high school is, what's next? What do I have to plan for? What do I have to do? And certainly we'll talk about some of those timelines, and there are things ahead, but it's also really important to remember you have plenty of time, that high school is about high school, that you are in high school not just for the purpose of applying to college one day or going to college one day. And that students out there, maybe you're 15 or 16, however old you might be, however old you might be when you head off, let's say 2 years from now, 2.5 years from now, to college, is going to be a slightly different person. And so you want to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure on yourself in this moment. There's plenty of time. This is about being an informed person or parent or family member of a student. It's less about trying to keep up track at this point with lots of to-dos and things on your list. I think the most important place to start if you are finishing your sophomore year or your student is the question, what do you want to know more about? It's a time to get curious, to ask yourself questions, students, to ask yourself, what do you like to do for fun? Where might you imagine yourself in a college or university setting? Who are you? And it's probably changing and growing, and that's great and okay too. But starting to ask those questions, I think, will be really important to the next 2 years ahead. And also, one day, months and months ahead, it'll be really helpful to you as you go through the college admissions and application process. Knowing yourself is the first place to start. That will really guide and shape what comes next. I'm going to start by talking about some of the terms or jargon you might hear in the college admissions process. And there are lots of phrases, acronyms, words that people throw about. The great thing about this process is there are lots of people you can ask for help. So you might not know all of these terms or phrases that you hear. Ask. Don't be afraid to ask a college admissions person, a high school teacher or school counselor. If a parent or friend has experience with the college admissions process, they can also be a good resource. But I thought I would start by giving us a common language to use and start with those terms. So the first thing you might hear about as you begin to peek around the corner towards the college admissions process, you might hear about application types. The good news is you have plenty of time. You have months and months, years even, before you need to actually worry about the application. But you might hear about application types. I have another slide. We'll get into some of those actual names. But simply put, it's how you apply to college, right? It's the method you apply to college. You might also hear about application rounds. Functionally, that's when you apply and when you hear back. Some rounds may have guidelines or commitments or restrictions on them. Don't need to worry about what those are in this moment, but just know that they exist. So, for example, Bowdoin offers early decision. Early decision is a binding commitment. If you're admitted under early decision, you've pledged to come. We don't need to get into the weeds because you don't need to worry about it yet, but it's just good information to know. Another phrase you might hear often in this process, holistic admissions. And again, put into simple terms, holistic admissions is thinking about the whole person and the whole application in an admissions review. So unlike a system where maybe it's a function of a certain GPA that gets you admitted to a college or some other criterion, this is thinking about all of the pieces that make you you and all of the pieces that you put forward in your application. Some other terms that are important to be familiar with, one is certainly financial aid. Financial aid is the support that a student receives from a college to help pay for college. And that might be need-based financial aid, for example, that's based on a student and family's financial circumstances. Some schools offer merit awards or merit scholarships. You might hear of athletic scholarships at, Division I institutions, for example, as well. So there's different ways, shapes, and forms, and there's a whole bunch of jargon when it comes to financial aid. But simply put, financial aid is the support a student receives from a college to help pay for college. You might also hear about standardized testing. Oftentimes, when people are talking about standardized testing, they're referring to the SAT or the ACT, to major standardized tests. They could also be referring to other standardized testing as well. You may hear the phrase open admissions, but admissions is probably what it sounds like. Most colleges and universities in the United States accept any student who applies. You can enroll, they are open to all students. And you may also hear of something like a college fair. A college fair is an event where many different college representatives come together and you have an opportunity to get more information, maybe go table to table or meet with college representatives in different ways. Some other organizations or acronyms that you might begin to hear about in the next 2 years. One is the FAFSA. That's the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. That's an important document a form you'll need to complete. Again, don't need to worry about it right now, but just want to introduce you to some of these terms and phrases. You might hear about the common application or the coalition application. Those are both application methods, applications you would use to apply or could use to apply to a college. You might hear about something called QuestBridge, which is an organization that works with highly talented low-income students on their journey towards college. Or you might hear of the organization College Board, which is an organization that offers standardized testing like the SAT or AP exams. The ACT is offered by the ACT, so I did not put that on this slide. But I share with you these phrases and these terms and this jargon, if you will, because I think part of the process of getting curious about the next 2 years is understanding some of the words you may hear frequently. So let's take a moment and talk about some of the myths of the college admissions process, specifically as it relates to students who are finishing their sophomore year. And then we'll talk about some ideas about the realities. So I think a big myth that I hear from students and families is you should know by the end of your sophomore year where you want to apply to college. And that's just absolutely not true. There are a lot of factors that go into what colleges you may ultimately put on your list when you apply in the fall of your senior year. A long time between now and the fall of the senior year. And those factors might change just as much as you might change. That's a good thing. I think now is the time to be open-minded and expansive and curious and consider all of the different possibilities of different kinds of institutions that might be a good match for you. And just a quick reminder here, there are more than 4,000 different colleges and universities around the United States, not even mentioning all of the schools around the world. So there's lots of different kinds of institutions, lots of different opportunities in many different places. Another myth I hear from students finishing their sophomore year is who I am today, that's who I'll be when I apply. We've kind of covered this a little bit, but just to really emphasize, now is a moment for self reflection and growth and exploration, because I also believe that's fundamentally not true. Here's a good one. Junior year is all about preparing to apply to college. I had a student tell me that not too long ago. And senior year is all about applying. I fundamentally reject this notion, and I think a lot of us in the college admissions world do as well. High school is about high school and embracing the opportunities that you have in this moment, whether it's at school, in your community, in your home life, whatever capacity that might be, is going to set you up to be a more effective storyteller of your story in the college admissions process. High school is not about applying to college. High school is about high school. So just a friendly reminder on that front. So coming back to that central question, getting curious. What do you want to know more about? And how do you engage in that process? What does that look like? As I continue, I know there's the opportunity for questions. So just a good reminder, if you have questions, please feel free to take advantage of that Q&A, and I promise we will make time to get to them. So one of the first things that I always encourage students wrapping up their sophomore year to think about is, where are there sources of information to learn more, not only about oneself, but also about colleges and universities in this process. And I think some of those resources are right at hand. So your school counselor might be a good source of information. Certainly teachers or others in your community, maybe your local library or teen center, or there's a community organization in which you're engaged, they can be really great resources and references as well. Colleges and universities, we are references and resources for you. We're sources of information. You can go straight to the source and ask us, so don't hesitate or forget to do that. Lots of information out there on the web and print-based materials. So you'll want to make sure to look at all of those different publications that you might come across from colleges, for example. When it comes specifically to an institution, admissions websites are great sources of information, lots of FAQs and pages on all different manner of topics. So check out our pages. You can reach out to us, email, phone. Some schools even have chat box opportunities or chat experiences where you can connect with us. A good place to check that out. There are virtual experiences, programs like the program you're on right now, as well as things like virtual tours, or maybe you have the opportunity to take that in person. So visiting a college, going on a campus tour, listening to an info session. Some schools might offer open houses or portfolio days, athletic related programming. It's really going to vary depending on the institution, but lots of different ways to engage in person as well. So as you're thinking about where you're collecting your information, you're collecting information, of course, about yourself, but also about different institutions and kinds of schools that might be a good match for ultimately what you're looking for in this process. And there are many different ways to do that. I always encourage students as they're doing the self-reflection to think about the people who are in their orbit who might know them well. It could be a family member, someone through school, employment, a club activity, a sport, religious life, whatever it might be, and chat with them and ask them, what kinds of experiences do you think I might really enjoy in college? Or I'm thinking about where I'd like to be close to home or far from home, or that kind of thing. I think this is the time to begin those that questioning period. As you're visiting, if you have the opportunity to visit or virtually visiting colleges and universities, this is also a great place to start collecting that information about your reactions to these experiences. Maybe you really find something appealing and interesting and can see yourself taking advantage of an opportunity at an institution. Maybe you have an experience where you realize, wow, this is not what I'm looking for. I thought it was, but it wasn't or isn't. That's why this period of inquiry can be so important. And you might think, Emily, you're really emphasizing self-discovery and exploration. What's that coming from? I think it's twofold, right? On one hand, it's the perfect time to do it because it's before you're really in the nuts and bolts of ultimately by senior year applying to colleges. But the other piece of that is I've seen students early on become really focused on, say, a particular institution, almost in sort of tunnel vision towards a particular college. And then they get to their senior year, let's say, and they need to have a broad list, something that we'll talk about in our programming that we offer juniors and seniors. You don't need to worry about a list right now, but eventually. And they haven't really given much thought to other institutions. Or maybe they imagine they're thinking one particular kind of school, but they've never really explored, whether in person or virtually, what that school might mean for them and their experience. So I always encourage students to be thinking early about these questions and what they're looking for. As you head into your junior year, and we'll talk about the summer in a minute, and I'm saying summer, but I recognize we have some folks from all over the world on the call today. So if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you're winter, but I'm going to say summer. Um, as you head into that junior year, sort of take that information gathering, that self-reflection, and identify where there are gaps. Where are there pieces of information that you still need that you're not sure that you have the answer to? Maybe it's about something that you're looking for in a college match. You haven't quite sorted out what the geographic preferences you have are, or academic preferences, or something about campus life or campus culture. Maybe you have strong senses of what those preferences are, but you're not sure which kinds of institutions or schools specifically meet them. That's where that junior year process can be really helpful. All right. So let's take a few minutes and talk about tips sort of underlining all of this, right? The first thing I really want to emphasize is you're going to receive a lot of information in the coming 2 years from colleges and universities. Maybe you already are. And that's great. It's another source of information for you. But you might note, if it hasn't happened already, that your inbox is probably becoming quite full. And so, something I always encourage students to think about early in this process is where they want all that information to go. There's lots of different ways you might handle this. I've seen students do any number of things, but you might want to consider students if you need or want to have a specific email address for college admissions. So maybe you have a school provided email and that's great and you want to use that throughout the process. Perfect, no problem. But maybe you think, well, I'm getting a lot of information because I've signed up for more information from different schools, or schools are finding me through various venues, and I want to sort of put it in its own mailbox, so to speak. Places like Gmail or other providers, free or no cost providers of email address services, can be great. So, first thing to consider, do you want to set up an email address just for the college admissions process? A word of wisdom: if you do this, students, keep in mind you need to check that email, especially down the line, 2 years from now when you've applied to colleges. That is where all of that outreach from institutions is going to end up in that inbox. So you want to make sure, no matter what email inbox system you decide to go with through this process, that you're checking your inbox. Another word of wisdom to family members who might be on the call: keep in mind that email is going to go to your student. It's not going to come to you. So this is a big shift, right? Part of the college admissions process is also growing and developing and learning to self-advocate, and in the process of development through the process as well. All of that to say, your student needs to check their email. You, the parent, family member, caregiver, are not probably going to be getting emails from institutions about application materials, things like that. All right, so think about how you want to handle email. The second thing I would recommend students do is think about keeping a notebook or a journal. One student told me recently she used the notes function on her phone. Whatever capacity, whatever method, analog, old school, tech forward, however you like to operate, think about how you're going to keep all of this information that you're collecting. This is especially true, I think, if you're taking advantage of the opportunities to engage with schools virtually or in person. Especially in person, schools might start to seem very similar, or months later, when you're thinking about your process, you might want to have some reminders of what you experienced or felt, or what was really appealing, or perhaps didn't line up with what you were expecting about a particular school. So especially if you're visiting places in person, but whether virtual or in person, think about where you're keeping your reflections and thoughts and notes, a notebook, a journal, a notes app, whatever works for you. Just another tidbit there. Something else I would suggest, and I hesitate to even raise this, and I'll explain why in a minute. But something I would suggest is keeping talk about admissions, college admissions, to a very specific time or day of the week, right? So maybe students, you decide you're only going to think about or talk with a family member about college admissions on, Sundays at 4 p.m or Wednesdays at 8 p.m. or whatever works for you and or those in your orbit. And the reason I hesitate to even raise this is because I do not think as a student finishing your sophomore year, you need to be spending much time thinking about college admissions in this moment. You really don't. But if you were, or if you are, and certainly in the years ahead, so this can be good advice. It's important to provide scaffolding and boundaries around when you talk and think about college admissions so that it doesn't become all consuming, so that it doesn't become the primary way you spend your time when you're not in class or at an activity or club or work, whatever it is in your day. Because it's just, as I mentioned, probably too many times in this session, high school is about high school. College admissions is not the point of high school. So you want to make sure to provide some boundaries there on that process. All right. So we've talked about keeping an open mind and that the summer after sophomore year and really junior year is a great time to be curious, to think expansively about different kinds of institutions that might be a good match, to think about just college in general and the steps ahead. And one of the things I often recommend students and families think about is where you can start to get that comparative data. Because I think sometimes students might worry, oh, do I need to go and actually visit in person or participate virtually with a specific school that I have my eye on? And sure, that can be, if you had an idea of an institution already, that can be a great opportunity. But even better, perhaps, is to just try out some various places because you'll start to get a feel in that self reflection and curiosity of what's important to you and what's not. So, as a junior, not right now as a sophomore, it's not something for sophomore year, but as a junior, as you come back after your summer, in the fall of your junior year, certainly maybe even the spring of your junior year, we're a year away at this point. You'll want to think about the opportunities you have to get to know more. And some of them are probably very close, literally and figuratively, to home. So there might be a college fair in your area. Maybe colleges are visiting your high school, or maybe colleges are coming to do an information session or having some sort of program in your area. If these events are open to juniors, and it varies, for example, school visits at your school might only be open to seniors, right? It's going to vary depending on the person. But if these things are open to juniors, you probably want to consider taking advantage of them because they can be a great resources in terms of getting more information, asking your questions. A year from now, you're probably going to have a much more defined sense of what you're looking for in this process. You might have more questions specifically that relate to the actual application process and what you're thinking about. And so these can be great ways to get that information. So let's talk timeline and how this all fits together with what you might be thinking or hearing about the college process. As heavily emphasized, now is a time for reflection, for curiosity, for information gathering and seeking. As you head into the junior year, and certainly as you think about a year from now, students want to begin forming the start of what may be your college list, but again, knowing that there's plenty and plenty of time before you're actually applying to colleges in the fall of the senior year. There's some conversations you might want to be having over the next year, again, long-term thinking here, around things like standardized testing and preparing for standardized testing if you're choosing to take standardized tests. discussions with those in your orbit family about financial aid, about financial considerations to your decision making, what that looks like, any other concerns that you might have that you want to discuss with others close to you as you think about forming and beginning to form that college list. And then the actual application process mostly takes place in the fall of your senior or 12th grade year. That's when you're going to want to finalize your college application list. There's going to be lots of forms and pieces and things you'll need to get together, students, to apply, also to apply for financial aid. Every year, I get at some point a phone call or an email from a student or parent asking about when they can start working on the college application. And I'm here to tell you, not only can I emphasize enough how much time you have between now and that point, but generally, and things always change, it could change between now and then when you're applying, but the college application doesn't even open until August of your senior year. So students, do not worry, as sophomores especially, there's nothing you can do on the actual application itself front until you get closer. But here are some of the different ways you might think about, sort of embracing this curiosity moment. One thing I would encourage students and families to think about is, are there colleges or universities that are easily accessible to you that you can use just as an introductory point, right? So maybe there's a college or university in your town or in a nearby city that you can visit. Maybe it's not a place you have any idea or ever imagined going, but it can be a great place to go for a tour or information session or to do a virtual program with, just to get started in thinking about this process, right? That might be something you're thinking about over the next 6 to 8 months. Sometimes students and families stop at colleges and universities while they're traveling. Maybe you're visiting a relative or have a vacation or are going somewhere and there's a college or university nearby. Again, it doesn't even have to be a school that you're particularly interested in. It can be a good opportunity to start practicing what it's like to visit a college if that's available to you. There's also lots of great virtual opportunities available if visiting in person is not feasible. So I just want to emphasize, whether it's in person or virtual, lots of different ways that you can get a sense of what a college might be like. Just a plug and a shout out here for virtual tours. At Bowdoin, for example, we have a complete virtual tour online. It's like you're there, here I should say, here in Maine. You can do a tour, you can hear student anecdotes, you can learn more about our campus. In the years since COVID-19, I think nearly all institutions have some form of a virtual tour available online. So definitely you want to check that out. But as I think about, as we transition into the Q&A, which I will get to in just a minute, sort of my parting advice and next steps for students, I do want to highlight this notion that, do what you love. And what I mean by that is, sometimes students will say to me, wow, if I didn't start an activity or a sports team or a hobby or a skill by grade 9, that's it, right? There's no chance to change my path. And I don't think that's true at all. I think the most compelling applicants to college are students who explore the things that are meaningful to them, and that authentic self comes through in the application. So students, this is my permission, my encouragement to do what you love. If there's something you've always wanted to try, if there's something new that you haven't had an opportunity to pursue until now as a junior, go for it, right? Please don't be overly concerned about what it does or does not mean in terms of your college admissions process. Join that club, try out for that team, get that job, whatever it might be. I think trying something new and doing what you love will make you a really strong applicant ultimately. But it's not about being a strong applicant, right? I think that's the other point. I think when students pursue things that they're really interested in, and doing for reasons that are personal and genuine, that comes through, and that's something that is definitely a strength in a student's application. So if there are things that you love to do, keep doing them. If there's something you want to try it. If there's something that's no longer serving you, it's okay to give it up. That's the other thing I would mention. Challenge is great. Challenge is where we grow. So, in the classroom or outside of it, particularly when it comes to academics, I encourage students to think about challenge and rigor in their course load. I know many students tell me junior year is a big year for their rigor, whether that's advanced placement or international baccalaureate or dual enrollment or A levels or whatever system that might be for you and your school. Certainly pursue rigor, certainly pursue challenge, but also remember balance. Remember, high school, again, is about high school. And the other thing I would just add here is junior year can be a great time to really forge strong relationships with your school teachers who ultimately you might want to ask to write a letter of recommendation. I don't think you need to go into junior year with an agenda, but I do think over the next 6 to 8 months, you'll want to spend some time thinking about, oh, wow, are there teachers I've had this year who I think I've really forged a strong connection with, who might write a compelling letter of recommendation for me ultimately when I get to the application stage. If you're wondering, wait, what's this about letters of recommendation? Have no fear. In the future, you can attend a year from now one of our junior programs about the actual application process and what that looks like. All right, so coming back to the overarching theme, and then I'm going to turn to the Q&A. I see we have a lot of great questions coming in. Feel free to continue the questions as well. I think overall, this is a really exciting time to do some self-reflection, some self-thinking, have and keep an open mind about the process. Try things out. Try something new and different. Know that you have plenty of time, but you also have these things that you can begin to think about so that when it becomes time for you to put more concretely into play some of these admissions or application steps, you're prepared and you've done the work to put yourself in that position. And more than anything, take a deep breath. We're here to help. College admissions officers are friendly people. We're in this work because we want to help you through this process, and you can always reach out to us. Um, something I told a student once is, if you don't want to call or write or email a school that you're really interested in because maybe for some reason it's intimidating to you, which I hope we're not intimidating people, but totally fair. You can always call or write or email a school that you have less interest in and ask them the question you want to ask the other college, right? So never hesitate to reach out with those questions. All right, I am turning my attention to the Q&A, and I'm going to try to answer as many of these questions as we can get through. Please feel free to continue to ask your questions, and if we don't get to your question, certainly you can always reach out to us via email at admissions@bowdoin.edu. All right. So there's a question here about AP, several questions here about AP courses and which courses to take. I'm just sort of combining some of your questions together here, and I appreciate that. Which courses to take? Does it matter if they are aligned with one's academic area of interest? How does that work? So just generally speaking, when it comes to preparation for Bowdoin, and probably many schools like us, most students who are coming to Bowdoin have pursued 4 years of full academic core subjects. So things like math, social studies or history, English or language arts, a world language, and a science. We really encourage students to work with their school counselor to figure out what is the best course for you in different areas, what choices that make the most sense, right? Does it make more sense for you to take 2 science courses in grade 12 because you've completed your school's world language sequence, whatever that might be, right? We leave those decisions up to you and your school counselor, thinking about your strengths and balance in your schedule and things of that nature. Um, Absolutely, I think students choose courses because of academic areas of interest and also other times because of general preparation for college. So I think it's going to be a balance of both, and I think it's going to reflect your student individual, pathway through college. We also know that sometimes your school may not offer a course that you would take sort of next in sequence. This can happen, for example, in areas like math, or maybe world language, any number of different disciplines. And again, that's where we really look to you and your school counselor and the context of your high school to understand your academic journey better. That's an important note to know about holistic admissions. It's all within the context of what's available to you. So we would not expect a student to take a class that's not offered at your high school, for example. There's a question about receive. I love this question. Thank you to this person. What does it mean if you receive mail and email from colleges? Many of them seem automatically generated, but sort of like what's the takeaway to take from away from this? One is, I think the big takeaway is we want you to have information. So we are, sending out information to students, and we here is the royal we of colleges and universities, because we want you to know more about our different schools as you're going through that process of discovery, of consideration of different factors that might be important to you. I both think students should feel, pleased to receive information, but also know that receiving information is not necessarily a reflection of your outcome on your application were you to apply to an institution, right? So don't hesitate to ask particular colleges questions if you have questions about anything you're receiving from them, but also know that we're eager to share information with you. And if you want to receive more information, maybe you're not receiving a lot of information, or there's a particular school you want to learn more about, nearly all, I'm just going to say all schools out there have a option somewhere on their website to request more information. They might call it an inquiry form, they might call it a join our mailing list form, they might call it any number of things, but you can learn and request more information from pretty much any college or university out there. So feel free to do that. There's a question about summer programs. Unfortunately, Bowdoin does not offer any summer programs for high school students. I wish we did. Maine is so beautiful in the summer. It would be great to have some of you and other wonderful high school students on our campus, but we do not have summer programs at Bowdoin. That said, there are a lot of colleges and universities that do have summer programs. And if you are in a position that you want to take advantage of that, it can be a great way to learn more about what a college or university setting is like. Some of those programs at some institutions also have scholarships or financial aid available. So, just a plug for taking advantage of all those opportunities if you're able or interested. But unfortunately, Bowdoin is not one of those schools. There's a question here about um, how do you differentiate between schools that seem very similar on paper in terms of academic size and location? And I think this is a great question because I think it's also one of the real challenges of the information seeking process, right? So some of the advice I have for students on this front is to think about the best ways to get at what's valued at a college or university, because oftentimes culture and community can be big differentiators in terms of what a school environment might be like for you. And there are different ways you can do that, right? One way might be to go to an information session in person or virtually that a school offers. Schools might call them different things. At Bowdoin, we call our virtual information session Bowdoin Basics, but you might hear and see different terms used at different colleges. And listen in that presentation for what college admissions people or students or whomever's involved in delivering that highlight as what's important to the school, right? So at Bowdoin, we talk a lot about kindness. We talk a lot about curiosity. We talk a lot about something we call the common good, this notion that we exist not just to educate these, brilliant young people from around the world, but also to have a positive impact, whatever that means to each person beyond that. You can hear these different values or characteristics, I think, in information sessions that can give you some insight into what the culture of a place might be like. We talk a lot about collaboration in our Bowdoin Basics session because these are big parts of our culture. On paper, lots of college universities are probably quite similar, but I think that culture bit and certainly the community bit are places that you can see some differentiation. And I think you can have that differentiating experience, certainly in person if you have an opportunity to visit, but it doesn't have to be in person. I think sometimes people think it does. I don't think that at all. Information sessions, other programs, many colleges and universities on their admissions websites have ways to get in touch with current students, ask a student, for example. That can be a great way to hear from current students what they think. I also encourage students to think about others they may know who go or have gone to a school. So perhaps there's people in your high school or in your community, your neighborhood, your workplace, whatever sort of communities make up the communities you're part of, who have a relationship or experience with a particular college. It can be great to say, oh, so and so went to XYZ University. I'm going to ask them what their experience is like. So those are some of the ways that I encourage students to think about the differentiators between schools, because there are a lot of similarities, but there's fundamental differences between every college and university out there. All right. Some questions about the weeds of financial aid. Just to sort of put a plug for a few different options where you can learn more. All colleges and universities in the United States have what's called a net price calculator on their website. You might see it abbreviated as NPC. But functionally, it's an opportunity to put in information about you and your family's financial circumstances and receive general information about financial aid, what you might receive in financial aid at an institution. I encourage students to think about net price calculators. The end of sophomore year is a little bit early, perhaps, but you certainly get started on that as you're thinking about your process. Know that subject to, information subject to change over the coming year and a half before you're in the application cycle as well. There's also a website that I think it's over 40 different colleges and universities are a part of. It's called My Intuition, MYINTUITION.org. And My Intuition is a simplified net price calculator for more than 40 different colleges and universities. It can also be a great way to get more information. All right. There's some questions about students who are international students and if there are differences, major differences in the application process for international students. This is going to really vary depending on the college or university that you apply to. Some colleges and universities may require you to submit additional information, such as an English language proficiency test. It's going to really depend on the school. At Bowdoin, we are test optional, and that includes for English language proficiency for all applicants. So we don't require that or any testing from any applicant. But every school is different, so it's going to really depend on the school in terms of additional application materials. All right. Um, I see some great questions about requirements, particularly at Bowdoin. I'm happy to answer this question live because I'm here, but I would just encourage you to check out websites. They can be really useful resources. One way to get at what requirements a school may have is using Google or your favorite online search function, is to add, type in phrases like curriculum requirements and the name of the college or university. You'll probably land on the website for that institution in terms of any requirements they may have. Another office you may hear frequently about in passing as you go through this process is something called the registrar's office. That can also be, depending on the college or university, a place where you get lots of information. But to answer this specific question for this student, Bowdoin does not have a foreign or world language requirement, although many students, I would say, do take advantage of language coursework at Bowdoin, but we do not have a requirement there. Some questions about, again, specific kinds of rigor within a high school context, and are certain kinds of rigor preferred over others. And I just want to emphasize again that you're only able to take advantage of what opportunities you have at your high school. And so, students, we would never expect you to take a class that was just not offered, right? So, if you go to a high school that has dual enrollment, we wouldn't expect you to take an AP. Or if you go to a high school that has AP, we wouldn't expect you to take a National Baccalaureate courses, and so on and so forth. Hopefully, you get the point. But we are looking to see, what are the challenging courses offered in your school that you've had available to you. We also know they're not always offered every term or every year, and how might you have taken advantage of those opportunities. I love that a person is already thinking about the college essay. And I love it because I get to tell you, certainly you can spend some time this summer thinking about your college essays, but you have so much time ahead of you. I don't know that I would really spend any time this year thinking about your college essays. I would wait several months before you get to that point, not just because I'm trying to reduce the sort of temperature in the room, if you will, but also because there's things that are going to happen between now and a year from now that might make for really good fodder for a college essay. And so, by writing your essay now, you might be jumping the gun in a way that means that you don't consider these other topics or ideas. That is a benefit to waiting, not till the hour before the application is due waiting, but waiting until you are closer to the actual application process. And so, just to answer this question, though, for this visitor, I would say, good essays help us understand the applicant better and tell something specific to the applicant. You might have heard this before. We can kind of call it the dropped essay test, right? If your essay was printed out or handwritten and dropped in the hallway of your high school and somebody picked it up and it didn't have your name on it, would they know that it was your essay? That's something to think about. But you don't need to think about it yet. You can think about it a year from now when you're thinking about your college essay. There's some questions about summer and what someone should be thinking about in terms of the summer. And I'm so glad this person asked this question because in the Northern Hemisphere, we're about to be in summer, and maybe you already have plans. Great, whatever they are, embrace them. Do not change them with what I'm about to say. Maybe you don't have plans. I always tell students, particularly after the sophomore year, do what makes you happy. Do something, but do what makes you happy. Some students may need to work for financial reasons. Some students may be taking advantage of being in the outdoors or athletics or involved in summer camp or the arts. Maybe you are exploring a personal hobby or you have an internship or doing research or some combination of all of these things. Maybe your plan is to read a really great stack of books you've been putting off and you can't wait to delve into, or finish building that robot that you're going to compete in the robot competition. Whatever it is, do something that makes you happy. Don't do something because you think it will enhance your college application. Sometimes students have a lot of flexibility in their summer plans. Sometimes I know summer plans are dictated by familial needs and other circumstances. So that is my best advice for the summer. If you haven't quite figured out what you're doing yet, I see all different kinds of things that students have done. Certainly, work is popular in all different kinds of capacities, internships and work and volunteer experiences. Um, all sorts of experiences with other students in different varieties, whether it's camping or outdoors experiences, scouting, maybe it's in the arts, music, theater, dance, maybe it's involved in religious life, athletics, training for athletics, or an athletics related camp. It runs the gamut. So, again, I would say do what makes you happy. There's some questions here about interviews. And again, this is one of those things that great to be asking and learning more about, but not something that you need to be worried about for over a year, right? So at Bowdoin, we actually do offer interviews. Most students are doing interviews virtually with an alum. We do offer some interviews in person as well on our campus. predominantly with senior students in our admissions office. Those aren't available to students until the summer before your senior year, so not something you can get a head start on. Whether colleges or universities offer interviews really varies. Some schools offer them in person and virtually. Some offer them via alumni, like the majority of our interviews are conducted with alumni. It's going to really depend on the school. Some don't offer them at all. So one of those questions you can add to your list as you're going through and getting more information is interviews. Do you offer them? What do they look like? All right. I see some additional questions here about I'm going to sort of roll these questions up together and talk about sort of what do colleges and universities um, look for in the process. And I guess I will just reemphasize here, I'm sharing this information in the spirit of sharing education and knowledge, not to in any way suggest that you shape your college or your high school experience to what I'm about to say. It's going to vary, right? Every college and university has its own admissions process and is looking for different things. I think the similarities you'll find certainly are an emphasis and interest in your academic preparation and success. So at Bowdoin, we're looking to see what courses have you had an opportunity to take, where you've had choice, what have you taken, how have you done in those courses. Equally important in that conversation is what kind of student are you in the classroom, right? What do your teachers say about you or your school counselor? So academic preparation and performance, I would say, is one piece of it. And then, again, this is going to vary depending on the institution. At Bowdoin, we're looking at all of the other pieces of your application as well. What do you do when you're not in class, right? In your high school or in your community, or, commitments you might have to work or in your family. How are you a member of community? What do you write about? What do you tell us through your essays is important to you or who you are? What do your recommenders help us see as how you might contribute to our community? What excites you about Bowdoin? All of these different pieces. We also have things like optional supplemental pieces. I'm not going to get into the weeds because this is so far off for you in terms of applying, but just know that in holistic admissions, we're looking at both your academic preparation and achievement, but also the other pieces because we're building communities, right? We're building classes of students on our campuses, and all of those different facets are interesting and important to us. Um, so there's a question here, and I think it's a great question. As you are doing your information seeking, you'll probably come across different kinds of institutions, right? You might learn about liberal arts and sciences colleges like Bowdoin. You might learn about, major research universities, public flagships, for example, maybe technical colleges or institutes. Maybe you'll learn about a community college in your community. There's all different kinds of institutions. And so there's a question about liberal arts colleges, which I think is a great question to answer because you're going to want to learn about all these different kinds of colleges and universities. So a student was asking about studying STEM fields at a liberal arts and sciences college like Bowdoin or liberal arts college like Bowdoin. And you'll note actually the by percentage, the largest number of students at Bowdoin are actually studying STEM fields in terms of major, but equally important, more than half of our students, or about half, it varies year to year, are studying more than one thing in terms of a major. So one of the questions you might want to add to your list as your information seeking is, what's the process for choosing a major or an academic area of study? At a college like Bowdoin, you're admitted to Bowdoin. You're admitted to the college. You're not admitted to a specific major or division or department. And you declare your major or majors, as it were, in the second semester of your sophomore year, so spring of your second year. And everything's available to you, all of our different 40 plus programs, departments, so on. And many students are engaged in STEM fields, and many students are engaged in research, not just in STEM fields. It's over 80% of our students will do an internship or a research project with a faculty member before they graduate. And that's across the spectrum of, the arts, humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. But anyway, that's a little bit off topic. But you'll want to ask, right? As you're information seeking, there are definitely colleges and universities where you're admitted to a specific major when you apply, or a particular college or school within a university, for example. So as you're thinking about what's important to you in your search, you're going to want to know a little bit more about, you know, how does that align with what I'm looking for? What does that mean? A place like Bode, we want folks to take lots of different kinds of courses during their 4 years in addition to their major. There are places where you might have a real in-depth focus in a particular track or area of study. It's going to vary. So definitely add these kinds of questions to your lists as you're looking around and doing your information seeking and trying to understand what might be a good match for you. One or two other questions before we wrap it up, because I want to be respectful of your time. And I know there are so many great questions that we're not getting to. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Admissions@bowdoin.edu is the email address if you have a question. But this person is asking about, GPAs and um, what does a GPA mean? And different schools have different grading styles and schemes, and so what of scales? What does that mean in terms of students, right? So again, this is one of those contextual pieces that colleges and universities are going to vary, but generally speaking, we look at your academic performance within the context of your high school. And so we are looking to see how you've performed within your school structure. So some schools have weighted GPAs, some schools don't even calculate a GPA, some schools are on a 100-point scale, some schools are on totally different scales or letter scales, so on and so forth. There's so many different varieties. I think there's something like 20,000 high schools in the US alone and probably 20,000 different approaches to grading. And so for Bowdoin at least, and probably other schools as well, we're looking at your performance within your school structure because we know that every school is different. All right. And last but not least, a question about a student who has moved a lot in high school. And does that have an impact on our understanding of their application? Students, we know that your trajectory in high school, but certainly just in general, is influenced by often factors outside of your control. Similarly, we understand that students have lots of different stories for many different reasons, and we're just excited to understand you a bit better. And we know every person brings their own story to the table in that process and understanding your application. So, all right, coming right up against time here. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, just to re-emphasize, take a deep breath, have a great summer. Know that you have plenty of time to think about all these different questions that might be on your mind. Now is really a time to reset, recharge, do some reflection, and know confidently you have this information and knowledge in your back pocket, but you can take the next few months to really think positively about this process. So best wishes to you. We're always here to help. Thank you for your interest in Bowdoin, and I hope that this program was helpful to you. Enjoy the rest of your sophomore year, everybody.